What if everything you've been taught about gardening is actually making your life harder than it needs to be? Most gardeners spend their weekends digging, deadheading, replanting, and watering, and then they do it all again the following year. It becomes a second job. And somewhere along the way, the joy of having a garden quietly disappears. But here's something that might stop you in your tracks. The gardeners with the most beautiful, lush, colorful yards. Many of them are doing far less than you. Not because they have some special gift or a professional gardener on speed dial, but because they made smarter plant choices right at the beginning. And today, I'm going to show you exactly what those choices look like. 10 perennials that prove you genuinely do not have to work this hard. Let's get into it. By the end of this video, you're going to have a complete list of 10 perennials that come back year after year, largely look after themselves, and get better with age, rather than demanding more from you over time. You'll understand what actually makes a plant low maintenance, so you'll never again waste money on something that sounds easy but turns out to be anything but. You'll learn a few simple habits, things you do once, not repeatedly, that set your garden up to thrive for years with very little input from you. And perhaps most importantly, you'll finish this video feeling genuinely excited about your garden again. Because gardening is supposed to be enjoyable. It's supposed to give you peace, beauty, and satisfaction, not aching knees and a never-ending to-do list. That's exactly what stress-free garden living is here to help you find. If you've ever planted something with the best of intentions, spent money on it, dug it in carefully, watered it faithfully, and then watched it struggle, or worse, watched it take over everything around it and become a problem, you'll know exactly how demoralizing that feels. The truth is, most of us were never really taught how to choose plants wisely. We picked things because they looked beautiful at the garden center, or because a neighbor had one, or because the label said, easy to grow. And sometimes that works out. But often it doesn't. Here at Stress-Free Garden Living, our whole focus is on helping you make smarter choices from the start, so your garden rewards you with beauty and peace rather than stress and endless work. Everything we share is practical, simple, and designed for real gardeners living real lives. So let's look at 10 perennials that genuinely deliver on that promise. Before we get into the plants themselves, I want to flag something important that's coming up later in this video. There's a tip about cutting back, or rather, about not cutting back, that goes against almost everything most gardeners instinctively do in autumn. And when you hear the reason behind it, I think it's going to completely change how you approach the end of your gardening season. It's one of those pieces of advice that sounds almost too good to be true. Do less, get better results. But there's real science behind it, and it could save you hours of work every single year. Keep watching, we'll get there. Let's start with something that changes everything, understanding what low maintenance actually means. Because here's the problem. That phrase gets thrown around constantly in gardening, and it's applied to all sorts of plants that really don't deserve it. A plant that needs deadheading every 2 weeks, or that has to be lifted and stored indoors every winter, or that dies completely if you forget to water it for 10 days, that is not a low-maintenance plant, whatever the label says. A truly low-maintenance perennial does 3 things. It comes back every year without you having to replant it. It handles a reasonable amount of neglect without sulking. And it gradually improves over time, filling in more space and flowering more abundantly, rather than declining and needing to be replaced. Keep those 3 things in mind as we go through the list, and you'll start to see exactly why these 10 plants stand apart from everything else. Let's start with one of the hardest working plants in the low-maintenance world. Coneflower, or Echinacea as it's also known, is the kind of plant that makes you look like a brilliant gardener with almost no effort on your part. It produces tall, cheerful flowers in shades of pink, purple, orange, and white from midsummer right through to early autumn. Then, when the flowers fade, the seed heads remain, and they are genuinely beautiful in their own right throughout winter. Here's why it works so well. Echinacea has an extraordinarily deep root system. Those roots reach down into the soil far beyond where drought or surface neglect can affect them. That's why it survives dry spells that would kill lesser plants. It's also completely cold hardy and comes back stronger each spring without any help from you. Imagine looking out at your garden in July and seeing bold, upright flowers swaying in a gentle breeze, no deadheading required, no staking needed, no drama. That's echinacea. Your action step is simple. Plant it in a sunny spot with reasonably well-drained soil. Water it in when you first plant it, and then largely leave it alone. It will handle everything else. Now, here's a plant that gives you an almost unfair amount of color for the amount of effort it asks for. Black-eyed Susan is one of those plants that seems to bloom forever. From midsummer onwards, it produces wave after wave of bright golden yellow flowers with a dark chocolate center, and it just keeps going. It self-seeds gently around the garden, which means it gradually fills empty spaces on its own without spreading aggressively or becoming a nuisance. The reason it performs so reliably is that it evolved in the wild meadows of North America, where it had to survive without any human help whatsoever. That wild DNA is still very much present. It tolerates poor soil, it tolerates heat, it tolerates drought. And its pollinators absolutely love it, so you're supporting your local ecosystem at the same time. Plant it in full sun, give it decent drainage, and step back. It will reward you every single summer. If you've ever struggled with a plant that blooms briefly and then does nothing for the rest of the summer, salvia is about to become your new best friend. Salvia flowers for an extraordinarily long season, sometimes from late spring all the way through to the first frosts. It comes in beautiful shades of blue, purple, and red, and it has a wonderful upright, architectural quality that gives your garden real structure without any effort from you. What makes it so reliable is its natural drought resistance. Salvia originally comes from hot, dry climates, and its silvery green leaves are specifically adapted to reduce water loss. This means that even during dry summers, it keeps performing when other plants are flagging. Bees are completely obsessed with salvia, which is a lovely bonus. Plant it at the front of a sunny border and simply enjoy the color and the wildlife it brings all season long. We're 3 plants in and already you have enough to create a genuinely beautiful, low-effort border. But stay with me, because the next few plants are the ones that really surprise people. One of them is perfect for those tricky shaded spots where nothing else seems to want to grow. And we still have that tip about doing less in autumn that could save you hours of work every year. Here's one for anyone who has a dry, sunny spot where other plants consistently struggle. Sedum, sometimes called stonecrop, is essentially indestructible. It's a succulent, which means it stores water in its thick, fleshy leaves. This makes it completely unbothered by drought, poor soil, or neglect. You could forget it exists for an entire summer and come back to find it thriving. Late flowering varieties like Sedum Autumn Joy are particularly spectacular. They produce large, flat flower heads that start out a pale green in summer, deepen to a rich dusty pink, and then turn a gorgeous copper red as autumn arrives. They look beautiful even after the first frosts, and the dried seed heads persist through winter, giving the garden structure and interest during the quietest months of the year. Plant Sedum in your sunniest, driest spot. It asks for almost nothing and gives you months of changing color in return. Now, what about those shaded corners that are the bane of so many gardeners' lives? The spots under trees, along the north side of the house, the areas where nothing ever seems to thrive? Hostas are your answer. And they are extraordinary. Hostas are grown primarily for their foliage rather than their flowers, and what foliage it is. Huge, dramatic leaves in shades of deep green, blue-green, gold, and variegated combinations of all 3. They emerge from the soil each spring like a slow, confident unfurling, and they grow larger and more impressive every single year. The reason hostas thrive in shade is that their large leaf surface area is specifically adapted to capture every available bit of light. They've evolved for exactly those conditions that challenge other plants. Once established, they require virtually no attention, just an occasional slug deterrent if your garden has a slug problem, which is worth mentioning honestly. Plant hostas in moist, shaded soil and watch them become the most dramatic feature in that corner of your garden. Let's talk about a plant that's so tough, so adaptable, and so generous with its flowers that it's been a gardening staple for generations, and for very good reason. Daylilies will grow in almost any soil, in sun or partial shade, in wet conditions or dry ones. They are genuinely one of the most adaptable plants you can choose. Each individual flower lasts only a single day, hence the name, but each plant produces so many buds in succession that the display goes on for weeks. Over time, daylilies form ever larger clumps that you can divide and spread around the garden for free. One plant becomes two, two become four, and before long you have daylilies filling spaces that might otherwise be overgrown with weeds. They do the work of filling your garden while you do very little at all. Plant them almost anywhere and let them get on with it. They will not let you down. This is the point in the video where I want to flag a mistake that I see constantly, and it's one that costs gardeners a lot of time and money every single year. The mistake is this. People prepare the soil beautifully, plant their perennials carefully, and then, nothing. No mulch. The bare soil around the plants is left completely exposed. And here's what happens next. Weeds move in immediately, because bare soil is an open invitation to every weed seed in the vicinity. The soil dries out quickly in warm weather, stressing the plants. And the gardener ends up spending hours weeding and watering when they could be sitting in a garden chair enjoying their garden instead. The fix is almost embarrassingly simple. Mulch. A layer of bark chips, garden compost, or wood chip around your perennials, about 5 to 8 centimeters deep, suppresses weeds, retains moisture, and gradually feeds the soil as it breaks down. You do it once a year in spring and it saves you countless hours throughout the season. If you take nothing else from this video, take that. Here's a plant for anyone who loves the idea of feathery, elegant plumes of color but assumes they'd need a lot of effort to achieve it. Astilbe produces the most beautiful fluffy flower spikes in shades of red, pink, white, and lilac, and it does this in partial shade and moist soil, conditions that many flowering plants simply refuse to tolerate. It's the perfect plant for those damp, shadier areas of the garden that can otherwise feel impossible to fill with color. Once planted in the right conditions, Astilbe spreads slowly and steadily, filling more space each year with very little input required. The dried flower heads remain attractive through autumn and winter, so there's no urgency to tidy them away. In fact, leaving them standing is actively better, which leads us perfectly to the tip I promised you earlier. Russian sage is one of those plants that looks like it should be difficult but absolutely isn't. It produces tall, airy stems covered in tiny lavender blue flowers from midsummer into autumn, creating a haze of soft color that looks spectacular when caught in evening light. The silvery stems and finely cut leaves add texture and interest even when it's not in full bloom. And it smells wonderful, a soft, herbal fragrance that drifts across the garden on warm days. Russian sage thrives in poor, dry soil and full sun, conditions where many plants give up entirely. It needs virtually no watering once established and requires nothing more than a hard cut back in spring to keep it tidy. One simple job, once a year. That's genuinely all it asks. Not to be confused with the tender geraniums you might grow in summer pots, hardy geraniums are a completely different and wonderfully tough plant that earns its place in any low-maintenance garden. Hardy geraniums form low, spreading mounds of attractive foliage that naturally suppress weeds simply by covering the ground. They flower freely, typically in shades of pink, purple, and white, and many varieties repeat flower through the season if you give them a quick trim after the first flush. Even without that trim, they still perform reliably year after year. They'll grow in sun or partial shade, in most soil types, and they spread gradually to fill empty spaces without ever becoming a genuine problem. They are one of the most versatile, unfussy plants available, and they look anything but plain. And now for our 10th plant, and the moment to talk about that tip I've been promising you. Creeping phlox is a low-growing, mat-forming plant that spreads across the ground in a carpet of tiny, vivid flowers every spring. In full bloom, it looks almost unreal, a dense, flowing blanket of pink, purple, or white that tumbles over walls, edges, and borders in the most spectacular way. It's one of the most visually dramatic plants you can grow for almost zero effort. But here's the bigger lesson that creeping phlox, and several of the other plants on this list, teaches us. The best thing you can do for many perennials in autumn is absolutely nothing. Most gardeners instinctively cut everything back as the season ends. It feels tidy, it feels responsible, it feels like good gardening. But for many perennials, those standing stems and seed heads are providing shelter for overwintering insects, food for birds, and actual frost protection for the crown of the plant itself. By cutting everything back hard in autumn, you're removing all of those benefits. Leave your perennials standing through winter. Enjoy the structure, the frost-covered seed heads, the wildlife activity they bring. Then cut back in late winter or very early spring, just as new growth begins to appear. You'll have done less work, your garden will look more interesting through winter, and your plants will be healthier for it. Doing less really is sometimes the smarter choice. So there you have it. 10 perennials that genuinely prove you don't have to work this hard in your garden. Coneflower and black-eyed Susan bring bold summer color with almost no attention needed. Salvia and Russian sage give you months of flowers and absolute drought resilience. Hostas and astilbe transform your shadiest, trickiest spots into genuine features. Sedum earns its place through every season, daylilies fill space generously and multiply for free, hardy geranium covers the ground and keeps weeds at bay, and creeping phlox delivers a spring display that will genuinely stop people in their tracks. And remember the foundations that make all of this work. Prepare your soil once before planting. Mulch generously in spring. Give your plants room to breathe and spread. And resist the urge to cut everything back in autumn, because doing less is often the most generous thing you can do for your garden. Your garden is supposed to be a place of joy. Not stress, not endless work, not a to-do list that never gets shorter. With the right plants and a few smart habits, it absolutely can be. If this video gave you something useful, whether that's a plant you hadn't considered, a new way of thinking about low-maintenance gardening, or just a bit of reassurance that you don't have to work as hard as you have been, I'd really love it if you gave it a thumbs up. It's a small thing that makes a huge difference in helping other gardeners find this channel, and it genuinely means a lot to everyone here at Stress-Free Garden Living. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do it now. Every week we share simple, practical ideas for growing a beautiful garden with less effort, less stress, and more enjoyment. Whether you're just starting out, or you've been gardening for years and you're simply tired of making it harder than it needs to be, this is exactly the place for you. Now I want to hear from you, because your answers always make the comments section the best part of this channel. Which of these 10 perennials are you most excited to try? Do you already grow any of them, and if so, how have they done for you? And here's a bonus question, are you someone who cuts everything back in autumn, or are you going to try leaving things standing this year? Drop your answer below. I read every single comment and I'd love to know what you're planning for your garden. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. I'll see you in the next video, where we'll be sharing another simple, stress-free way to make your garden work harder so you don't have to. Take care, and happy gardening.